Hello and welcome. I'm Shannon Piper, Director of Marketing Communications for Lexipol. I'm so glad that you could all join us today for this webinar on community police engagement. So there's a lot of talk about community police engagement. It's certainly been a hot topic. It's not a new topic, and that's something that we'll actually talk about a little bit today. But I think that there's a general sense that we know that it's needed, but it sometimes can be kind of difficult to visualize exactly what it is. What does it look like in action? What are the results that you can and should expect from a community engagement program? So today we're going to look at 3 different approaches and hopefully give you some best practices and some tips into what a community engagement program can be. Obviously there's a big range of those types of programs, but our goal is that you come away with a few tips that you can maybe implement in your organization. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone is joining us on muted lines today so that we can kind of keep the presentation clear and make it easier for you to hear. But we do want to hear from you, and there's a question field in your webinar console. I encourage you to send in a question at any time during the presentation. Hopefully at the end of the presentation we'll have some time to take a few of those audience questions. So please, if you have a question about the content, just go ahead and submit that at any time. Our session is being recorded, so we'll send a recording out to everyone who's registered. That'll come out probably about a few hours after the event, and we'll also give you a landing page at the end of the webinar that will have some additional resources and a link to where you can view that recording. Just give us a few hours after the event to get that up. I have to give you our standard disclaimer. This is an educational event. It's not meant to be any sort of legal advice, so just take that into consideration when you're listening to our wonderful presenters. And I'm going to go through our presenters very quickly today because we do have several people on the line, and I don't want to hold up our great content, the great content they're going to share with you by going through any sort of long and detailed introductions, but I'll go through them real quick. So pleased to have Gordon Graham here today. Gordon is our co-founder of Lexipol, and he's an attorney and risk management expert who's presented to hundreds of thousands of public safety personnel across the country and internationally. Officer Ryan Tillman and Lieutenant Rodney Lombard are both with the Chino, California Police Department, and they are founders of a program you're going to hear about. It's called Breaking Barriers United, which is a unique outreach program focused mostly on youth. Chief Robert Johnson of the Menlo Park Police Department in California, and the Menlo Park is an agency that has been recognized by the International Association of Chiefs of Police for excellence in community policing. So he's going to share some of the programs that they have in place as well. And last but not least, Sergeant Michael Hesser of the Columbia Police Department in Missouri, an agency that has received remarkable results through something called Geographic Policing. So all of them are going to share their approaches with you today, and I'm going to start by turning it over to Gordon.
Well, thanks, Shannon, and thanks to all the presenters, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to this. On your screen, you see this question, what is community engagement? And from our COPS office back in Washington, D.C., that's the definition they came up with years and years and years ago. But the bottom line, though, is on the next screen. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to be having dinner with the chief of London Metropolitan Police Department. And after dinner, he gave me his business card. Underneath his name and his title was this phrase, my job is to know my community before I need to know them. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant, knowing your community before you need to know them. The bottom line for me on so many things is if the first time you meet members of your community is after the shooting, after the in-custody death, after the patrol car collision, after some major event, you are too late. Now, I learned this in my career with CHP. Every one of the 120 or so area office commanders has a list of key contacts, people in the community, elected officials, community leaders, church leaders, people who are recognized in the community, and they have an obligation to make contact with these people on a regular basis, essentially knowing your community before you need to know them. Which brings us to an audience poll, and I'll turn this over to Shannon, but I'd like to get some numbers here so we can get a feel for where we are. Shannon?
Yes, thanks, Gordon. So our first poll is actually coming at you right now, and you should see that on your screen, so please go ahead and vote. So our question there is, in your estimation, what percentage of officers in your department live in the community you serve? And I'm seeing answers come in, Gordon, so I'm going to leave the voting open for just about 10 more seconds, and then we'll be able to collect the results and give them to you, because it's kind of neat to be able to see that in real time.
It's amazing the way this all works, isn't it?
Technology is a wonderful thing when it works. All right, so I'm seeing a good response rate. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and then share those results. And you should see those results come across the screen. And I see that the way we have the screen set up for Gordon, you can't see it. So I'll go ahead and read those out to you. 36% are less than 25% of their officers living in the community. 18% are between 25 and 50. And then we've got about a quarter are 50 to 75% living, and a quarter that are 75 to 100%. So actually a quarter are saying up to 100% of their officers are living in the community.
Well, that's good news, and I bet you a lot of that, I've got this California bias where you really can't afford to live in your community. You have to live someplace else. But on a national level, this is very promising that a lot of cops live in the area that they protect and they serve. That's good news. You already have a leg up because you know the people, you know the good people, you know the crime spots, you know the bad people, you know these things simply because, not just because you're a cop, but because you live in the community and you know those problems. That's part of it. But when we don't know our community, that's a problem lying in wait. Now the second poll question is coming up now.
Yes, let's go ahead and launch that. So everyone should see that. And our question there is, can you name and recognize your city council members and community religious leaders? And that's a dual one there. They not just name them, but be able to recognize them out in the community.
Yeah. If you're at an officer-involved shooting and there's a community leader standing on the perimeter outside the yellow tape looking at you, do you need to walk up and say hello to that person?
Yes.
Well, the answer is yes, but if you don't even know who that person is, that's a problem lying in wait.
Absolutely. So let's see, we've got a good response rate there. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share that. And this is great. We've got 77% saying yes and 16% no, with a 7% not sure.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And again, I'm impressed with that. Yeah. Knowing your community. If we can go to the next slide real quick there, Shannon, that'd be great. For those of you who have been to my live programs, you know my pitch in life. As a lawyer, I handle tragedies after they occur. Prior to law school was graduate school, where I picked up a degree in risk management. What can we do up front? Ignoring problems lying in wait is an ongoing issue in our profession. You know, many times I get phone calls from people, well, my people can't write, we need to have a report writing class. And I said, well, the report writing class, you're addressing the proximate cause. The real problem lying in wait is if you've hired people who can't write, a report writing class is not going to make them a writer. You know, and I could carry that on to so many different fields. Well, today, if you don't know the community that you protect and serve, if you don't know the key contacts, the leaders of that community, if you don't have any clue what's really going on there, if you have 12-hour shifts and you live 70 miles away, and I see that in so many major agencies in California, people living far away, they watch cable TV, they don't even watch the local news, that's a problem lying in wait. So what can we do to address these problems lying in wait? Well, I spend a lot of time on airplanes. And I do a lot of thinking on airplanes. So I came up with some basic strategies over a period of years to help these problems lying in wait. And you see those in front of you there. The ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval and of police actions. That one I thought about a lot. Police must secure the willing cooperation of the public and voluntary observance of the law to be able to secure and maintain the respect of the public. That one is one of my originals, and I came up with that one on an airplane. Item number 3 here, the degree of cooperation of the public that can be secured diminishes proportionately to the necessity of the use of physical force. Our next one, police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. Police seek to preserve public favor. Police seek and preserve public favor not by catering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolute impartial service to the law. That one I thought of originally, and I worked on these things a lot, and I put those there because ultimately I would love to see all of these things present. Now, for the real bright people who are watching this, you are looking at me saying right now, I think I might have heard this before, more on that later. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to two of our presenters from Chino Police Department, Lieutenant Rodney Lombard and Officer Ryan Tillman. And their program, Breaking Barriers United, is really, really brilliant. I learned about this a couple of years ago, and I'm very impressed with what they're doing. I'll turn it over to Lieutenant and Officer Tillman. Please take over.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate it. This is Ryan Tillman on the line. I just want to first and foremost thank you guys for having me on this webinar today. It's a true honor to be here.
Yes, hello guys. My name is Lieutenant Rodney Lombard. I work with the Chino Police Department in Chino, California. Again, it is a great honor for us to be here with you guys. And my partner, Ryan Tillman, came up with a phenomenal program that we were able to develop together, and it's our pleasure to be able to share this information with you guys today.
Just a quick brief, a little bit of information about how we got founded. In 2014, surrounding the events around Ferguson, I actually had this idea to kind of want to create a program that could bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. And the reason that happened is because growing up in my neighborhood, I wasn't a big fan of law enforcement. I actually had quite a few negative encounters with law enforcement as well as my family members. And so I had this God-inspired idea to create a program that was geared specifically towards bridging the gap by hosting different type of events in our cities. And our key premise is transparency. And since we've launched this program in 2014, it's grown to something that I can't even fathom still to this day. And it's only because of the support of my partner, Lieutenant Lombard, people like Gordon Graham. But I want to send a special thanks to my police department, which is Chino Police Department, because I recognize that there's a lot of agencies that don't endorse officers doing community engagement events, and they endorse it from day one because they recognize the need for community engagement in our city. So that's a little bit of history about our organization.
Yes, and like Officer Tillman said, our police chief, Chief Karen Comstock, when she took over as the chief of our police department, which was a little over 3 years ago, she came in with a strategic vision that had 4 pillars as part of that vision. Well, one of the pillars was community outreach. That actually fit hand in glove with what we were doing at the time, so she embraced it and basically gave us the carte blanche to go out and develop this program. And the goal in the program is again, to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. We do so through neutrality and a transparent dialogue. And the dialogue has to be transparent because we don't want it to be another dog and pony show. And we know historically there's been a barrier that's existed between the law enforcement and community members. Well, the only way to break that barrier down is first to recognize that there have been some wrongs that have been done on behalf of law enforcement, and B, to be bold enough to confront some of those wrongs, to give the community members a voice, to allow them to feel included now in the law enforcement function, which is basically what we've done through this program.
And during our presentations, there's a lot of different goals that we are trying to accomplish. But one of the things that we've actually inputted into our program about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, which has been phenomenal, is we actually tell our audience members that we're sorry on behalf of some of the things that they've seen in law enforcement. And the reason we do that is because we don't realize how much hurt is actually occurring to some people that live in our communities. Sometimes we just do our job and go about our business and go home and don't think twice about what we did that day. Well, many of our audience members specifically have had many tragic experiences. Whether or not it was their fault or not, it still doesn't remove the trauma that's occurred. I've had students tell me in my presentations that their brother was killed at the hands of the police. Well, I don't care, whether or not their brother was in the wrong or right, to have some type of trauma that occurred at the because their brother was killed at the hands of law enforcement is still trauma. So we're not negating the fact that a majority of what we do is good and a majority of the stuff that we do is justified, but we are basically saying, hey, yeah, there is a percentage of what occurs in law enforcement that is wrong, and on behalf of that we are going to say sorry. So that's been phenomenal and shown phenomenal success in our organization.
Yeah, Ryan, if you go ahead with the target audience.
Yeah, so right now our target audience is kind of evolved actually. We started initially with churches in our communities because we recognize that many of our churches hold a lot of the key religious leaders in our community. So what we did is we started targeting members of congregations throughout the city for what all types of different churches. That has since evolved into focusing on a lot of the youth in our community. And the reason we did that is because we recognize that the youth is obviously going to be tomorrow's future. So we want to make sure that we can approach the youth, try to get them before they start making mistakes, try to get them to see what their perception is of law enforcement and see if we can repair that. And then once we captivated the audience of the youth, then we realized that we were actually able to target their parents as well. And so some of the things that we've actually been able to accomplish is we actually have different contracts with local school districts here in our area, like Riverside Unified School District, Chaffey Unified School District, things of that nature. And they've allowed us to come into their school districts, deliver our presentations to their students, and then on the other side of that, they've also allowed us to do presentations with their parents at different dates. So what we do is we actually survey the kids before we actually start the presentation, and the survey includes questions such as, what's your perception of law enforcement, negative or positive? Have you ever had a bad experience with law enforcement, either directly or indirectly? And then we ask them questions, hey, would you like to be mentored by law enforcement, yes or no? And then one of the other ones that's actually been a key one is, what do you think the role of the student resource officer is? Because some of these students think it's just to enforce the law, where others think, hey, no, this guy should be mentoring me or not. So at every single one of our presentations, we actually have SROs present, for that specific city. So for example, I work in the city of Chino, however, I do a lot of presentations in Riverside. So I actually request that the SRO from Riverside Police Department are present, so BBU can actually serve as the icebreaker for a lot of these other agencies. So that way, when we leave, there's a better and a long-lasting relationships between students and SRO. And so these are some pictures from our events. We actually put a lot of the kids through scenarios, but we'll touch on a little bit more of that later.
Yeah, just to give you an overview of what our program looks like. The first thing, like Ryan said, we start off with a public apology, and then we actually have a slide that says we are sorry. We want to acknowledge some of those things that have gone on in the past. We don't want to negate anyone's feelings, anyone's experiences, and play them down. So that's one of the things we do. We tell a personal story of who we are, where we grew up, some of the experiences that we had with law enforcement, be they positive or negative. We share the experience, our personal experience. We solicit the experiences of the audience members. We also do scenarios with the audience members. And this has proven to be very powerful. We have 3 scenarios that we've created, all of which are based on real-life law enforcement interactions. And we have the audience member that will come up, and they play the role of the police officer in those scenarios, and they go through the emotions that police officers go through on a daily basis. They go through anxiety, they go through fear, they go through uncertainty, and it's very powerful. At the end of the scenarios, we'll bring those participants back up, and we do a debrief with them and let them share with the other members of the audience what they experienced during that time. And we do that specifically so we can humanize the badge. We want them to see that police officers, despite the fact that we wear the badge, we wear the gun, that there's a human side to us. We experience human emotion just like everyone else, and it's proven to be incredibly, incredibly powerful. Another thing that we realize is that there's a lack of knowledge and understanding on behalf of a lot of the community members out there. They don't know what we can do, they don't know why we can do it, and they don't know what gives us the authority to do so. So we'll go through, and in California, it's California Penal Code 835. We'll go through that. We'll discuss what exactly that does, the power, the authority that comes along with it, the situations under which force can be used. We talk about reasonableness, and we're really trying to create an atmosphere of understanding where misunderstanding and misinformation once existed. Now to give them some input, give them some insight, let them know, hey, these are the situations under which officers can use force. This is why they use force. This is what gives them the authority to use force. And it's, you know, once you have that mutual understanding, it changes everything about the relationship.
Perfect.
Right.
So the results that we've seen have been phenomenal. You know, we've had it's funny. You know, we do this presentation with so many students, and you know, going in, a lot of the perceptions. One of the questions I ask at the very beginning of our presentation is, "Hey, let's get the white elephant out of the room. You know, how many people in here do not like law enforcement?" And the amount of hands we see is pretty substantial. And it's not kind of no surprise given the climate that we're living in with law enforcement and community engagement. But after is what's been so phenomenal. We actually do surveys to see, you know, how many students actually would recommend this presentation to their friends. And it's been about 80% of the students in there. We've also had situations where we ask, hey, how many of you students would like to be mentored by a police officer in some capacity? And again, that's probably been the most substantial number, which has been around, you know, 85% of the students in there. Another thing is, we asked the question, how many people prior to this presentation would be interested in going into a career in law enforcement? And, you know, it's not that many. Well, once we get done with the presentation, the amount of people that actually want to get into this line of work is phenomenal. And so what we've actually seen is not only are we educating the community about what it is that we do as in our profession, but we're realizing that this has actually turned out to be a great recruitment tool for a lot of our organizations out this way, because on one end, we're changing the perception of what law enforcement or the perceived what they perceive law enforcement to be, and then on the other end, we're actually getting more kids that want to come to the door in maybe an Explorer program or a cadet program, and then soon to be officers. So the results we received have been phenomenal. We've actually getting a lot more different contracts with school districts around this region, and that's also been phenomenal. And then the biggest thing, and I guess the thing that's played the most on my heart when it comes to delivering this presentation is just the personal stories that I've actually heard from you know, kids or even parents about some of the issues that they've either had with law enforcement, but on the other end, some of the positive interactions that they've had with law enforcement. So the results have been outstanding. This program is growing at a rate that I can't even fathom anymore. But one thing I've realized that's key in delivering this presentation is it has to be done in a strategic manner. This program is very strategic in how we deliver it, because we start with obviously one of the transparency approach. We actually allow a portion of the program for our audience members to tell their peers about a negative experience that they've actually had with law enforcement. Again, we open up with the public apology. Then we move forward and we actually let the audience members into a glimpse of our own lives. We actually show pictures of us when we're not working. We show videos of us, you know, doing different types of things outside of work. And then we actually move forward and we show pictures of us while we're working. We show pictures or videos of us of things that we've actually done in the community as we're working, because we want them to see, hey, you know, just because we wear a badge doesn't mean that I'm this way 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We want them to see that when we leave work, we're actually just like you in a lot of different ways. Then we actually move forward and we talk about what goes into becoming a police officer, the training that goes into it, and a lot of things of that nature. And then we progress and we we go through the scenarios. And then the most phenomenal part about the whole situation is we actually end with the Q&A session, as the lieutenant was discussing. The Q&A session allows them to ask us any questions that have been burning on their heart forever. Because one thing we've all seen in this profession is that a lot of people love to take to social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to express their displeasure with law enforcement, or to express, you know, a situation that they had, or give their opinion about a certain situation. Whereas if we were talking person to person, they wouldn't ask those specific questions, or they would try to steer away from, you know, asking some of the obvious questions. So we've actually said, hey, you know what, let's just ask the questions in person. And we have yet to walk into any hostile environment when we've done this presentation to where people are confrontational with us and don't want to, you know, talk to us or anything. We've actually changed the hearts of many. So, you know, this program that we've created has been phenomenal. and we're actually creating an apprenticeship program currently, so that way we can get all types of different officers from other agencies involved, so that way they can go into their communities and do the same thing that we're doing. And so there's a strategic method in the way we deliver this program, but once it's delivered effectively, it's turned out to be a phenomenal success.
Yeah, and lastly, you know, the lesson we learned, probably the most profound lesson that we've learned, is that, you know, transparency is a must. If we don't deliver this presentation in a transparent way, it just doesn't work, because community members don't want to come in and hear all the great things about police departments only. They want to hear us address some of the issues that are current and that are relevant to some of the things that are going on in our communities today. So we have to be bold enough and transparent enough to address those issues. And once we do, it has a tendency for those community members to begin to let their guard down, to begin to be more willing to engage, to have those conversations, and to start that dialogue that needs to take place, and leading to that connection that we need to have with our community members. And once we have that connection, then that will usher in the trust that we need for the community members and the police to take an active part in public safety and to assuring that our communities are safe for the residents, for visitors, for the children, and just to make it a place where we have that real sense of community to build upon and overcome some of the issues that have existed in the recent past.
Well, thanks, Lieutenant, and thank you, Officer Tillman. You know, just to recap, they only had a few minutes to talk about their program, but I've had the opportunity to actually attend the program. And what they glanced over very quickly was the role playing. And I'm watching the audience during this role playing, where they're dressing up ministers, they're dressing up members of the community in quasi-police uniforms, with the gun belt, with the rubber gun, of course, and watching their reaction and how quickly the reverends were pulling out the guns and shooting people who had their hands in their pockets. And all of a sudden there was this reality, you know, this realization in the audience, wow, this cop job is not what I thought it was. There's a lot of things going on that I wasn't aware of. And this whole Breaking Barriers United program, I think, is just brilliant. And again, recapping the top story here, we have an idea from an officer, support from a lieutenant, support from a chief of police, and good things happen. So, speaking of chiefs of police, I'd like to move on to the chief of Menlo Park, California, Chief Robert Johnson. Again, an idea coming to fruition, where they had a problem part of their community and he addressed it proactively. And I can tell you this because I know many chiefs in Northern California. This is a model for the rest of many of the big cities in Northern California now. Chief Johnson, thank you so much for coming on today, and I'm turning it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Gordon, for having me, and I'd like to echo what you said and commend Officer Tillman and Lieutenant Lombard on their innovative and collaborative approach for reaching out and engaging our youth. Very important part of community policing. I won't be focusing necessarily on one particular program. What I'll really be doing is providing an overview of what we've done in Menlo Park over the past 5 years. I came up here in 2013 to be the chief of the Menlo Park Police Department from Los Angeles, where I'd spent 27 years. So it was an interesting transition because I came from an organization where resources were basically unlimited, 18,000 employees to tap upon and reach out to for support, to an organization that has 70 employees, 48 sworn, and last month our council added 6 more officers to our department, which is great. But it's a community that's relatively small. It's a city of 32,000 residents, but it's a city that has a lot going on. It's considered one of the most culturally and economically diverse populations in the Silicon Valley. We're the home to one of the largest private organizations in the world, and that's the home of Facebook. And I'll talk about the partnership with them a little bit later. But as Gordon mentioned, we had one particular neighborhood that had been plagued for many, many years to gang-related violence. Now, when I first got up here, coming from Los Angeles, the view of gang-related violence was a little different than it was in Los Angeles, but this particular neighborhood was plagued with about 10 to 12 gang-related shootings a year, and it kind of been consistent to that for several years. So it really, for that neighborhood, was significant because it's a smaller neighborhood in a small city, and it was one of the first things I knew I had to address just to reduce the fear. And so how we went about that, one of the first things I did when I came into Menlo Park was I developed and put together a community advisory group. And as Gordon mentioned with that quote earlier, know your community before you need to know them. The challenge for me coming from a different part of the state was I knew nobody. I was completely an outsider, so not only did I not know the residents, I really didn't know the culture of the area, the partnerships with the other law enforcement agencies, and really even the personnel from within. So I had a lot of work that I had to do, but to start that, I felt it was important to form an advisory group. How I went about doing that, and that was in 2013, I took advantage of the app that was relatively new at the time, Nextdoor. Many of you use it, I'm assuming. But the value of that app at this particular time was that within the Nextdoor application, it maps out your city into distinct neighborhoods. And what I used that for was to put together an advisory group that was representative of each particular neighborhood. Even though it's one city, I wanted to make sure I had community representation for each neighborhood. And within Menlo Park, that is made up of 20 distinct neighborhoods. So I had one representative at least from each of those neighborhoods. We put that group together in 2013. It is still active today. We meet once a month. And the reason we formed it initially was for me to get to know members of the community, but also to have an open line of communication and be able to identify some of the primary concerns for those particular neighborhoods. And it was very effective because one of the first things we did was create a strategic traffic plan. But without question, it allowed us to develop some comprehensive and coordinated plans to help the neighborhoods and what they wanted most addressed. And the other thing that I had the advantage of coming into is that the city at the time was hosting a Belhaven visioning process. And the Belhaven neighborhood, the one I talked about that was plagued with the gang-related violence. So that is a neighborhood that our engagement was really limited in. We didn't have a lot of communication going on. The trust between the community and law enforcement was somewhat strained because they didn't feel we were truly addressing their needs and capable of reducing the fear of gang-related incidents. So that Belhaven visioning process really was able to give us that part to engage with the community, really hear from them firsthand on the violence that was going on, the fear that it was instilling, and the restrictions that it was imposing on their daily quality of life. So it really gave us an avenue to start moving forward. And from that, we realized it was time to really break down the city, do a comprehensive analysis regarding what was happening in that particular neighborhood. And our outcome was relatively shocking because even though I said they had about 10 to 12 shootings in that region each year, we found a vast majority of those shootings were connected in one capacity or another with 3 distinct properties, meaning that the people in those properties, the residents of those properties, were either victims of the crime or connected to the crime or were actually suspects in the crime. So we really did a concentrated movement to work with the landlords. All 3 of those properties were rental properties. Started working very closely with the landlords, and at times they were oblivious to what was going on and the frequency of crime at their particular properties, because a couple of them were actually out-of-state landlords, so they didn't have a lot of direct contact with the day-to-day activity in the area. So we were able to address that, and we put personnel assigned specifically to those properties to work with the landlords, work with the residents, work with the tenants. And by the end of 2013, we had resolved a lot of the gang-related incidents in that neighborhood. And as you can see by the slide, we have not had a gang-related shooting in that neighborhood, or in fact in the entire city, since November of 2013. Now the other interesting thing that's not on the slide is 2014, from 2013 to 2014, we actually had a couple of other key things that were brought into play from the visioning process. What those were is they had wanted a new substation for the area. They had an old one that was run down and outdated, so we were able to build a new service center, new substation, very visible, very accessible in the Belhaven neighborhood. We were also able to put up surveillance cameras, which, as many of you know, can be very controversial, but because of the support of the community, we were able to get that approved through our council and be able to align them down a main corridor of that neighborhood. And at the same time, they also approved our implementation and integration of license plate readers. The agency did not have them prior to that point. We were able to purchase 3 of them. So the reason I bring that up is, it's nearly impossible to say what exactly attributed to the reduction in crime in that particular neighborhood, because we had so many things that were implemented right around the same time. Some were proactive enforcement, some were deterrence, but they all worked very well for us. And what we found by doing that and reducing the fear in the neighborhood, our partnership with them expanded tremendously. The lines of communication opened. They started working much better with us as far as addressing issues, becoming involved in their own neighborhood. We were able to form and identify numerous neighborhood watch block captains. We were also able to use social media in a way that we hadn't before. We used probably 8 to 10 different platforms, depending on the particular neighborhoods that we communicate with them on a daily basis with. One of the things that we were able to do, it's very similar to Coffee with the Cops, but to continue that constant interaction with the community, we developed what we refer to as Friday Night Lights. And this is a program that we put in place in 2013. It's put on during football season, really based behind the movie and the book, Friday Night Lights. Football is very popular up here. Obviously, the 49ers have just moved to Santa Clara County, so both, and you have Stanford here. So between the high school, the college, and professional football is a big attraction. So we do these events on Friday nights. We open them up to the community. It's basically a tailgate party where we bring everybody and invite everybody to attend. We focus the officers of that particular shift as the stars. So we have postcards made with the officers, the team of the day, and the kids come up and they get to sign the postcard. The officers get the kids get the autographs of the officers, and then they get free giveaways. And it's turned out to be a phenomenal, very well attended. We do it once a month, like I said, during football season. So it's become very popular for us. And the last thing on this particular slide is that really applies to our advisory group. We've used them. Their role in this department has expanded dramatically. We've used them to vet almost every decision we do as far as what we're going to roll out into a community, whether it's new patrol vehicles, the tasers, which we had approved as well, tactical vests. We even had them review our body camera policy and let them provide input and recommendations so that we would have a more transparent body camera policy, which we have in Menlo Park. All of our officers have body cameras. That's been quite the transition up here in Northern California. We were the first agency within the region to have every officer, meaning detectives, police officers, code enforcement, wear body cameras, and they've worked very, very well for us. So in a nutshell, that's really kind of it. The results have been significant. We've dramatically reduced violent crime in the city over the past 5 years, specifically in that Belhaven neighborhood. As mentioned earlier, we've had no gang-related shootings. We just recently had a shooting. It had to do with 2 transients in one of our homeless encampments, but the gang-related violence has diminished almost to zero. We've had a marked increase in our community involvement, and it's become really a great relationship and partnership. And as Gordon had mentioned, our most recent award was just the IACP Cisco Award for Excellence in Community Policing. So we're very proud of things we've accomplished. And I guess the moral of talking about these things is just to let the smaller agencies know you can do a lot, even with the limited resources. You don't need 18,000 people. but it's that partnership with the community that really makes a difference. So I wish everyone the best in their efforts in implementing and moving forward community policing within your organization. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Gordon.
Thanks, Chief, and congratulations on a great program there. And you know, I don't know if you've heard this, but I sure have at my conferences up there. Well, Menlo Park is doing this, and Menlo Park is doing this. And when people are holding you up as a success story, that's just fantastic. And this one program is demonstrative of everything that's going on in that great city. Thanks again, Chief, for taking the time to come on board. Now we're moving to the middle of America here with Michael Hester, Sergeant back in Columbia, Missouri Police Department. Sergeant Hester, you're doing some great stuff back there also. Why don't you tell us about it?
Thank you, Gordon. It's an honor to be in this group of guys and just listening in on their suggestions and their plans. I've been taking notes. We were tasked with expanding an operation that was started to address violent crime in a specific park in our city. They had stationed 2 officers there full-time to deal with this one 6-acre park. So what we did was partner with our city's social equity team, and they had identified through the Tucson Stress Index 3 neighborhoods throughout our city that needed more investment and more attention. Columbia, Missouri sits in the middle of Missouri. We've got about 115 full-time residents, and we have the University of Missouri, Columbia College, Stevens College, Bryan College. So we have about maybe 35,000 college students who also go through here. So we've got a really diverse population. So what we did was our first thing was to draft our mission and intended outcomes and goals. So my lieutenant and I kind of came up with those based on our own experience in the community and, you know, kind of best practices stuff. And what we really set out to do was to rebuild partnerships with our community. I used to think I was a great patrol cop when I'd roll my window down and say hi to kids or maybe get out for a minute and shoot a basket here or there. But that's not a relationship. That's kind of drive-by compassion. And my experience with people in poverty and in the stressed part of our city is they need more than just drive-by compassion. They need someone to partner with. They need a relationship. And I think that's what I've heard from the previous presenters is building a relationship is critical to increasing the effectiveness of the police and, more importantly, protecting the citizens. So what we decided to do was listen and act upon the cares of the folks who lived in these neighborhoods. So to do that, we've become part of neighborhood meetings. We have hosted barbecues. We've hosted meetings at people's houses. We've gotten out on foot. And I think that's probably the best thing we've done is meet people where they're at instead of asking them to come somewhere else. You know, again, just to echo what my peers here have said, having community contacts is critical. You know, obviously we know the city councilman, but the religious leaders are important. And each neighborhood kind of has that person or family that watches out for other people. And we have found that those folks are far more motivated and dedicated to seeing a positive change in their community. Again, just to echo what they've done, we've tried to create relationships and communications where people are comfortable to criticize us. I mean, there's a lot of hurt and misunderstanding out there. So we've tried to be better listeners and hear out what people have to say about how they see the police, because it is critical that the police are seen as part of the community rather than, you know, to quote some people, an occupying military force. That doesn't work. And that's not a relationship either. So the other thing City of Columbia did with their social equity and the Tucson Stress Index, once we identified these 3 neighborhoods, and it wasn't just crime data, it was poverty level, who's failing in school, who's using the free lunch program. We got out on foot, and we started meeting people on their blocks. And we listened when they said who was dealing drugs, and we started attending to those people. When they started bringing up things as diverse as speeding or stop signs you couldn't see. We started to attend to those. So just to get back to our mission goals real quick, you can go back one slide. I think a key component of success is that people have to feel comfortable communicating with you, and that you have to act when they identify dangerous people. So I just want to point that out. If we can go forward a slide. So one thing that I think that's led to our success is we haven't become hands-off on enforcement. There are people in our neighborhoods who are causing problems who need to be arrested to restore peace to the neighborhood. And I think maintaining that integrity with the citizens has been critical. For instance, when people say, well, do you guys really care about our neighborhood? Or, you know, you just out here to put something on the front page of the paper that says you care, but really you don't care. When we arrest the dangerous people that the citizens have identified, that goes a long way towards building ongoing trust. We cannot ignore to do that. So, and then the last thing we laid out was being in Douglas Park. That was the original park that officers were stationed at, and just kind of hanging out and getting to know people. And we didn't just hang out and get to know people. We brought in resources that they might need. So we'll talk more about that. Next slide, please. So our chief instituted geographic policing in 2009. He assigned the officers to that park, and when the city social equity team identified their 3 neighborhoods, we took off from there. We kind of expanded it. We wanted to just not police one park. We wanted to get out and really make a difference in our city's crime trends. Next slide, please. So what we did from there is just start with the partnerships, start with the relationships, and let it go. So what happened? We got out on foot every day. I require the officers to get out on foot. We go visit the schools. As they did that, we started seeing fewer and fewer calls in our 3 stressed neighborhoods, and the numbers are up there on the screen. You can see for yourselves. That's kind of a force multiplier. Some officers have the view that, why are we wasting time doing this? But if I was working those beats, I would be happier to have a reduction in crime, which coincidentally, there were no other areas of the city that experienced a reduction, that drastic of a reduction. So we feel like because more people called us, because more people were willing to step forward, I think Tillman referenced the post-Ferguson mindset of don't talk to the police. It's an issue when you're trying to protect innocent people and to hold accountable those people who harm other people. If citizens won't talk to you, your law enforcement efficiency goes down. So by getting out on foot, by getting out of the car, going to schools and talking to kids where they're at, the schools have welcomed us with open arms. They've been really a partner with us. We have been able to realize for the citizens these reductions. So next slide, please. One thing that we did early on is on a Friday night of all nights at 6 p.m. we invited anybody who wanted to come who had some kind of product that would help people, like counselors, substance abuse counselors, job programs, to come to a meeting and say, hey, we want to find out some partners that we can get this rolling with. So about 123 different providers showed up on a Friday night and volunteered or offered their services, and that was a good thing, I think, for the community. Policing is policing. If someone's dangerous, they need to be arrested. They need to be held accountable. But what we've tried to do is dig down to the root causes of why are these neighborhoods in stress. If it was just crime, we would have solved this years ago with a bunch of arrests, and that would have been that. But there's things that drive crime that are not apparent to your typical patrol officer because they have to get to the next call. So we started finding out, for instance, that a kid who was acting up at school because we were in the schools, said, well, I don't even have any food in the refrigerator for the weekend. Well, if you're 14 and hungry at school, you probably have a pretty sour attitude on life and the world. So the officers called the food bank. They delivered food to that family. And, you know, our local food bank was awesome. They kind of came in after hours. They gave us more than they're supposed to. And that's an example of finding a partner that's equipped to provide longer-term relief than just a policeman. And I love being a cop. You know, I'm proud of it. I think 99.9% of cops are great people. But the job that we have said they were hired for was to handle this and then go on to the next call. And that is not a relationship. So by kind of slowing down what was expected of them, you know, one thing I've insisted on is we get away from, we got to clear all the pending calls off of the list, because what that does is encourage millimeters deep investment in the call instead of digging down to the roots. So the citizens see that. If you can show up and spend more time than the typical patrol officer who has a workload that never stops, you can form that relationship. And that pays dividends down the road in lots of ways. Again, my peers have already touched on more cooperation, less crime, more public understanding of what we do. Because people appreciate that, and they deserve it. That's the other thing. We got so busy in law enforcement, we thought we had to get to the next call. Citizens are experiencing crisis that's important to them. And that looks pretty uncaring if you're like, well, here's the least time I can invest, I have to go to something else. So I think that investment of time, which seems expensive in the face of response times, like, you know, no administrator wants to say, well, it took us 30 minutes to get to these calls. If you spend extra time on calls that deserve it, those other calls will go down. But more importantly, when you have the big call, you have people right there willing to help and talk. Next slide, please. So the officers in this unit, we now have 8 officers in 4 different neighborhoods. They are empowered to kind of run their area, not just by crime data, although that's part of it. You know, look, crunching the numbers, like if there's a lot of shootings, I expect them to attenuate to the violent people. If there's a lot of burglaries, you know, that is their job to figure that out. But we're figuring it out kind of by contacting the citizens, by getting out and being part of the community, as opposed to getting a call, going there, and then leaving. So again, I think relationship is the most important thing. Getting out of the car and getting away from that we have calls pending mentality. It's been said, but I think it is the most critical intended outcome for law enforcement and the citizens, and I think it's the most return on our investment. You have to get out and form relationships with your citizens before something bad happens, because something bad will happen. We've had a lot of shootings here in Columbia, Missouri over the last few years. Eventually, one of our cops, on duty or off, is going to get caught right in the middle of that. And they're going to be forced to make a split-second decision, which we all know how that goes. But I think by gaining the trust of some of our neighborhoods, that, number one, they will report people before it gets that dangerous. We've had more calls. And number two, if something bad does happen, we have people that are willing to stick up for us. And I'll give you a quick example. In one of our neighborhoods, one of our officers was forced to shoot a man who had walked through a neighborhood randomly shooting. And the officer was white, and the person was black who was shot by the officer. And at the initial scene, there was some people who were yelling, which is understandable. It's an emotional tragedy. But the next day, I went out on foot with one of the officers in my unit, and we went door to door and just asked people if they were okay. And they said, well, what are you doing here? Why do you guys care? We want to make sure you're okay. It was dangerous what happened yesterday. And so literally we went up and down the block right there where it happened, which I've never done as a police officer. And we were doing that for caretaking. And the only complaint we got was, why didn't you shoot that guy earlier? Why'd you let this go on so long? Which is far different, I think, than you see on the news on a consistent basis. And I think that trust was hard-earned by the officers assigned to that area who get out there every day and do a great job. And that's the kind of dividend that pays off, because folks don't understand why we use force and why we might do this or that. But they do understand safety, and the trust that we earned up front was conveyed to the other officers. And I think that is priceless for the city, for the citizens, and for the police. We've hosted barbecues. People laugh about it. So that's where we kind of started rubbing elbows with people. And that goes on long term. Next slide, if I have one. Sorry, my button's not working. Oh, I get to turn it off. But I just appreciate being on this panel with these guys who've done a great job. Like I said, I've got a bunch of notes here. So thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Hester, and thanks, Chief Burton, for giving all the support to the good sergeant and making all this stuff happen back there. You know, we've just heard from three different groups of presenters, of course, 211 and Chief Johnson and Sergeant Hester. You know, the message that I take away from this is where we kick this thing off. My job is to know my community before I need to know them. And I teased you earlier on with some of the original ideas that I had on how to make things better, improve police-community relations, and I've gotten several emails from people, hey, Gordon, those weren't your ideas. You stole those from Sir Robert Peel. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I didn't come up with that stuff. Robert Peel, you know, the Bobbies over there in London. Where do they come up with the name Bobbies? Oh, those are Peel's boys. The Peelers, the Bobbies. He came up with the stuff in the early 1800s. And when I went to the academy back in 1973, I never heard about this Peel guy, and I ran into his writings on a fluke. And I'm reading this stuff 150, 170 years later. This is sheer genius. If you've never taken a look at Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing, take a look at him and how he developed these things a long, long time ago. And they've been given to every new officer in the London Met since 1829. This guy's been around. So the bottom line, let's know our community before we need to know them. To facilitate you with, or help you make this happen in your organization, I've got a couple closing comments. All of the presenters today, this is not the first idea they've had. They've been thinking about things, as many of you have. What we've learned at Lexipol is the people who sign on to these webinars early on are the thinkers, the movers, the shakers, the 10%ers, the people who want to see things change in our profession. So for all of you executives out there, today and in the future, remember this, please. Some of the best and brightest people you've got are the lowest levels of the organization. They have chosen not to promote because they love what they do. And when they come forward and say, you know something, Chief, you know something, Captain, you know something, Lieutenant, I've got an idea. Do not dismiss them offhand as a rambling psycho. We know what we're doing here. We've been established for a long time. We know what we're doing. Some of the ideas that the young kids are coming up with are absolutely incredible. They have different experiences, different ideas. Please listen to what they say. Recognize the value of the input from the people at the lowest levels in your organization and people outside of your organization. Taking this seriously, I think, will really, really give us good benefits in the future. So those are my comments. I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon. Thank you so much for putting this all together, Shannon.
Well, thanks, Gordon, and thank you to our entire panel. Just so much that we heard about today and that we went over, and there's obviously a lot more that we could say, but we do want to respect everybody's time as well. So we are close to the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and take just a few questions for those of you who can hang on, because we do have quite a few questions coming in from the audience. So the first question that I had, we had a couple different iterations of this, so I'll just sort of sum it up. What sort of statistics or demographics statistics should you be measuring to determine the effectiveness of engagement programs? And Chief Johnson, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Well, one of the things we do is, at least at Menlo Park, is we do a community survey every year. So we kind of have an idea from the survey throughout the city as a whole. And we also, I get the feedback, like I said, each month from the advisory group. And without question, I mean, there's been some things, some ideas that we've decided to put out, or programs that initially just didn't have a resounding success. So we keep in contact with the neighborhoods constantly to get the feedback. When we hear something's not going well, we either move on or we revise it, so it does work well for that particular neighborhood.
Excellent. And Sergeant Hester, you shared quite a few statistics. Did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Our city does a satisfaction survey with the police through the utility bill. That's a great one. And, you know, we measure on a daily basis, you know, how much foot patrol they've done, how many hours they spent at a school, what reports they took, and also, you know, who are the citizens saying is the most dangerous person in their neighborhood.
Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, great. Our next question has to do with funding, and again, we got a couple of different questions around this. Officer Tillman and Lieutenant Lombard, I'll start with you. Are you able to share where your funding comes from for the program costs, things like T-shirts, that sort of thing?
Yeah, no problem. So we've actually partnered with a lot of the school districts because they have restorative justice grant funds that they get through their organizations. And so our organization or our program will classify as a restorative justice initiative. And so they've actually been able to find funding within those grants that are out there. And so we usually use that or they actually use that amount of money to fund our program to come into their cities. And then on the other end of the side, we actually sell T-shirts for BBU that are actually part of a branding campaign. And what those BBU T-shirts basically go towards are funding us to get more T-shirts for the kids that we give during our program. So our T-shirts are actually out there with members from all sorts of different organizations, such as the NFL and you know, different type of businesses and things like that. So that's kind of where we've been getting our funding from, is through a lot of these school districts that are seeking the grant money through the Restorative Justice Initiative. Excellent.
Chief Johnson, any comments about funding?
Well, funding for Menlo Park has been pretty unique. Yeah, we also go after grants specifically for our strategic traffic plan to be able to do some proactive enforcement. But a lot of our funding has been through our partnership with our businesses, specifically being Facebook, and those that have followed Menlo Park are probably aware that Facebook was very, very much involved in the building and designing of our new substation down in the Belhaven neighborhood that I noted earlier, as well as funding an SRO for us. And most recently, they contributed $12 million so we could fund the 6 additional officers. Not every community has a Facebook, and that has been a topic, that private-public partnership. And I do think it's the way we're going for those that do have major companies within your jurisdiction, is to start reaching out and finding a way to do that. The Facebook funding went through a development agreement because they have been expanding tremendously throughout our city. So they were able to work that with the city for future anticipation of law enforcement services. So it's a creative way, but it's a necessary way.
And don't think that Facebook just throws money around. They are very, very, very wise with the spending of the money. They recognize the benefit of having their headquarters in a city that's safe, a city that's diverse, a city that respects its citizens. They understand the value there, and that's very important. It's not just giving away money. They want, you know, the return. What am I going to get out of this? What's going to be my return on investment here? And they're getting an excellent return up at Menlo Park.
Absolutely, and that's probably, though there is only one Facebook, and that's a unique situation, as the chief mentioned. At the same time, I think that there's probably elements of that model that could be implemented in other communities as well. Gordon, here's a question. It's sort of a comment, but also maybe there's a question element to it as well, because I know you've talked a lot about hiring the best and looking for specific characteristics and traits in our hiring and how that has to change. The comment was that that officers involved in this type of a program need to have a high emotional intelligence. Do you agree? And how do you screen for that? How do you make sure that we're hiring the best?
Well, it starts off, the whole hiring process starts with 4 key components: recruitment, backgrounds, probation, and performance evaluations. Recruitment right now, our applicant pool is an applicant puddle, And when your applicant pool is an applicant puddle, that's a problem lying in wait. So we have to come up with better ideas on how to increase the size of the applicant pool. For everybody out there, you do not have to lower standards to increase the size of your applicant pool. Comprehensive background investigations are absolutely essential. Hiring good people, taking the probationary process seriously. In every state that I've been to, probation is part of the hiring process. If you got women and men on probation who can't or won't do the job, maybe they're in the wrong line of work. And honest, solid performance evaluations. But let's assume we got good people, and I believe that we do. Here's a problem I see. You know something, Mary? You know something, John? You screwed up patrol, you screwed up detective, you screwed up the evidence room, so we're going to make you our school resource officer. No, that's the wrong way to be looking at this thing. People have problems. Let's find a job that will work for them, and maybe the SRO position is not the one that's going to work for them. These are the first point of contact that kids are going to have with a cop, one-on-one, and we don't put our best and our brightest in there. Let's identify those really good women and men who really, really want to be in that school, not some dumping ground for the people who are not happy in law enforcement. Well, we'll give you this job as an SRO. That's just a problem lying in wait. And as you've heard me say so many times, predictable is preventable. Nothing good's going to happen here.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. And we are a few minutes over the hour, so I apologize that we couldn't get to all the questions. I appreciate everyone who attended today and submitted a question. Gordon, any last words?
Nope, it's just an honor to be able to be part of this great profession. As you heard a couple times today, we've got someplace between 800 and 900,000 cops in this country, probably making an average 2 million contacts a day. That's, 730 some odd million contacts in a year. The vast majority of things that our women and men are doing, we're doing right. Occasionally things don't go right, and we're all working together to identify those strategies and tactics that we can put into place up front to better assure things go right so that everybody benefits. And that's my closing comments.
Thank you so much, and thanks to our entire panel. Appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and your experiences with us. Very valuable information. There is a link on the screen right now where you can go to get additional information. We will put the recording of the webinar up there as well. And there's some training bulletins and some policies, as well as all the contact information for all of our presenters today. So if you do want to get in touch with them, it will be available for you there. Thanks everyone for attending, and appreciate you being here, appreciate the panel, and we hope to see you again at another Lexipol event soon. Thanks and take care.